Thank you very much, Marjorie, and I thank the Georgetown Law Center for hosting us today or letting us use this auditorium, and I thank all of you in this room who have kept the flame alive and are still trying to get our nation to become the locomotive rather than the caboose in honoring and protecting the rights of all children. And I think that this year is pregnant with opportunity, and I hope we make sure we give birth to a new America in its commitment in joining the rest of the world and leading the rest of the world as mentor on the care and protection of children. I'm just baffled about why it is so hard to get our country to do what is right and sensible and cost-effective for children. So thank you for your work. Don't get discouraged. Work harder, because this is an extraordinary moment, I think, of challenge and opportunity. I thank Marjorie. I've just gotten back, and I'm going to go someplace this afternoon, early evening. And anyway, if you have hard questions on the Convention on the Rights of the Child, it's nice to have somebody who can answer them all. So if you see me leave, you should keep her here as your expert, and I'm sure she will tell you everything you need to know about the strategy. And I'm so grateful for her leadership on this issue and on many other children's issues. We're living at an incredible moment of opportunity and peril and challenge in history. Few of us have been blessed to experience both a new century and a new millennium, and those of us who are American citizens are now blessed with a new African-American president that we thought we'd never see in our lives. So I think we should just remember that miracles backed by hard work and strategic sense can happen. And I think we've got a lot. There are many people who have, in the campaign, referred to the campaign as one of affirmative action, that the president got to be president through affirmative action. I said affirmative action had nothing to do with it. He had a vision that he was able to see when most other people didn't do it. He had the courage to claim that vision. He out-strategized, he out-fundraised, he out-organized, he outworked absolutely everybody, and affirmative action had nothing to do with it. He beat everybody fair and square. And I think that there are many lessons in that campaign for all of us. But he's also put forth now, I think, a new stimulus package and a new budget, which in many ways is the best budget we've ever seen for the poor. And we're now discussing national health insurance, and we have our job full in trying to make sure that children don't fall off the table and pregnant women don't fall off the table, and the pressure to get a health insurance deal this year, because some still claim there's not enough money. But, you know, we don't have a money problem. We have a values problem, and we have a political values and organizing problem, and that gets back to us. And while he's done his job in getting elected and trying to change the priorities of the nation, he can't do it without us. We've got to organize on the outside. There has to be a movement, because they are at bottom no friends in politics. And he's got his hands full trying to solve two wars and Pakistan. I think that I'm more worried about Pakistan than even Iraq or Afghanistan in some ways. He's got the worst economic crisis that we've ever had, and he's got global warming, and he's got budget deficits, and he's got all the old special interests that he's taken on. And if children are not going to get lost, and if we're going to get, in fact, the investments and the new change in policies that we have to have, you and I are going to have to build a very loud, irresistible movement for change. So I'm just very grateful for what you have been doing in these very lean years in the wilderness, and they've been hard years for a long time. We've only had 2 Democratic administrations in the last 40 years, but now we do have hope. And so your meeting here is greatly timed, and I just want to thank you again by saying don't slack up. This is the time to work even harder. I find I'm sleeping less these days than I have been in previous years, because I just am desperate to make sure we do not lose this harvest time. We have not had this window of opportunity to begin to reset our moral compass in this nation, and we've got to finish the job that the first civil rights movement in America began by putting the social and economic underpinnings beneath those political and civil rights, because hope has to have meat on its bones. It has to have health care and mental health care. It has to have quality early childhood care. It has to have protections against abuse and neglect, all the things that the Convention on the Right of the Child would affirm as basic human rights. And so how do we make that happen? But this is the time of opportunity to seize it. And while we all been so blessed to live at this Kairos time, I believe. It's almost a time that feels biblical to me. It is a time that feels biblical. The question for us is how we're going to say thanks for the life and earth and nation and children that God has entrusted to our care. What legacies and principles and values are we going to stand for and send to the present and future through our children and grandchildren to their children and to a spiritually confused and vulcanized and violent nation and world that is desperately hungering for moral leadership? What kind of ancestors are going to you and I be? I was at Chicago for a wonderful passage. There's a great transformation going on from the Moses Miriam generation to the Deborah Joshua generation in the black pulpit and in major pulpits around the country. And Otis Moss III succeeded Jeremiah Wright as the head of Trinity, and we were there until midnight, having a very good time. But it's very moving to see this new generation. And as I walk through the White House or agencies here, it's amazing to me to see the people pop out of the door, and who are they? They are my children's playgroup, many of them. And I said, you're in charge of Russia policy, you're in charge of whatever, but it's terrific. And so I think we've got new energy. But having grandchildren, and I had a party yesterday, has radicalized me all over again. And I think the sense of urgency in making sure that we leave the earth safer and better than we found it is just even more with me these days than ever before. I think we need to really talk about how we're going to measure progress over the next 100 or 1,000 years if we survive them. Are we going to measure progress by the kill power and number of weapons of destruction that we can produce and traffic at home and abroad, or by our willingness to shrink and indeed destroy the nuclear prison of terror that we have constructed in the name of peace and security? And I'm glad to see that the notion of zero tolerance for zero adult weapons, nuclear weapons, is at least now getting some currency and getting some traction. And in fact, the president endorsed it in his campaign. Will we be remembered in these early years of the 21st century by how many new weapons of death we can manufacture and market abroad and at home, or by our efforts to relate to each other in nonviolent ways? And we need to talk about conflict resolution and nonviolent training in all of our schools and community institutions. We don't have too much of an answer, enough of an answer to the cultural glorification of violence everywhere, in our media, on our video games, on the internet, in our priorities, and where we lead the world in military exports and military production. But how do we begin to teach our children nonviolent conflict resolution? And remember what Dr. King said, is that we're either going to learn to live with each other as brothers and sisters, or as there's no choice between violence and nonviolence. There's a choice between nonviolence and non-existence. And as our nuclear precarity kind of becomes even more so each day, the notion of trying to say, let's find another way of relating to each other is very important. Well, America is going to be remembered by how many material things we can produce and advertise, sell, and consume, or by our rediscovery of more lasting values of success. A new Dow Jones for the purpose and quality of life in our families and neighborhoods and national community. Dr. King, 41 years ago, warned us about buying into a burning house or with values that didn't matter. He warned us about excessive militarism and excessive materialism, and about racism and poverty, and called to an end of poverty. And we tend to celebrate him everywhere, but we don't follow him. And I think it's very important that we begin to look at his warnings and see how we can garner some wisdom from it. Are we going to be remembered in this period by how rapidly technology and corporate mergermania and greed can render human beings and human work obsolete, or by our efforts to ensure a better balance between corporate profits and corporate caring for children, families, and communities? As you look at this global economic debacle that we've all been struggling with, you want to say, who raised all these people to think, that we could have so few get so much at the expense of so many, and think that this growing gap globally and nationally between rich and poor could just continue to go and go and go, and that we could have this free market capitalism that was heedless of the human needs around them? And can we, out of this period of great crisis, have some thoughtful debate and begin to ask and demand that our leaders and our private sector leaders as well as government leaders ask different questions about our obligation to children and to the future and to communities. Will those coming behind us